Welcome to Longevity by Design, a podcast designed to give individuals access to the leading scientific information in the field of longevity. The ability to add years to your life and life to your years needs no opinion. Join us as we ask science to take the wheel. In each episode, Dr. Gil Blander joins a co-host and an industry expert in the field of longevity, shining a light and getting the answers to the key question: how can we live a longer, healthier life?
Hello, I'm Gil Blander. Welcome to Longevity by Design, how to live a longer, healthier life. We are produced by Inside Tracker, your science-based guide to optimize your body from the inside out. Our guest today is Dr. Nick Burd. So I want to say that it's a great pleasure for me to be here at the University of Illinois. I came here to be part of the scientific advisory board for the Personalized Nutrition Initiative at the University of Illinois. I was very impressed by what they are doing. And I decided to capitalize on this opportunity and to meet with Nick, which is an expert in exercise physiology, and basically discuss what Nick is doing and how can us adopt exercise physiology to allow us to live better longer. So thank you so much for cleaning an hour and a half or so from your busy time. Nick?
Yep, no problem, Gil. Yeah. Happy to be here.
And by the way, Nick is currently in the middle of an experiment. He's collecting a muscle biopsy from human. We'll discuss it later. It's very fascinating. I would love to see it, but I assume that I won't have time for that today. But Nick, maybe we'll start with a background about yourself. Can you provide to our audience who is Nick? What have you done? What was your scientific endeavor and so on?
Of course, Gil, yeah. So who is Nick? Yeah, what a great question. First and foremost, I'm an associate professor here at the University of Illinois. Primary affiliation is in the Department of Kinesiology and Community Health, affiliate with the Division of Nutritional Sciences, as well as affiliate with the Personalized Nutrition Initiative, which Gil's here today to help with, so we appreciate that. In terms of, why science, I guess, is really the question. I always said I was going to be a scientist or a firefighter, and so I'm here as a scientist, so something went wrong with the firefighting aspect. No, seriously, I had a lot of great mentors in my life, just a lot of like-minded people. Obviously this starts with mentors. So as an undergrad, I was able to work in the Human Performance Lab under the tutelage of Todd Trappe, same place that Dave Costal came from, which is a legendary exercise physiologist. And he inspired me to be a scientist, and then had an opportunity to head up north in Canada to work with Stu Phillips, and over to the Netherlands with Luc van Loon, all focused on exercise phys with an emphasis in muscle metabolism. So I said collectively those individuals were just a huge part of my life, kept me inspired. Really made science fun, right? I always say if you don't wake up with a smile on your face every day, what's the point? And those guys were always supportive, always made sure the team was smiling, and really kept me motivated to be in science as opposed to become a firefighter. So I love questions. I love the culture in science. There's a lot of, when you're around like-minded people, it's the best. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like the point that you mentioned about make science fun. In every occupation, if you don't like the job that you're doing, find a different job. Don't waste your time. You live only once. So I loved your attitude. Thank you so much for this very insightful answer. And now I would like to start a deep dive into science and specifically into exercise physiology. So maybe let's start by the basic. And can you describe the different three types of muscle tissue that we have in our body?
Yeah, sure. So by trade, my expertise is skeletal muscle physiology, but as Gil alluded to, do have an expertise globally in exercise phys. So I can speak to that question, of course, Gil. So the three types of muscle, we have skeletal muscle tissue, we have cardiac muscle tissue, as well as smooth muscle, all playing specific roles to allow us to perform and exercise, survive. Do you have any other specific questions related?
For example, what percentage of our body is the skeletal muscle, if you can estimate?
Yeah, so I mean, depending on the modeling you're using, so body composition, you got to keep in mind, Gil, they're all estimates, right? There's never, some people forget that our tools are estimates, and with each estimate, there's pros and cons, but using DEXA or the more gold standard estimates, the amount of skeletal muscle mass that a healthy human has is about 40% of their total body mass is going to be skeletal muscle, roughly 20% body fat, and then the rest would be non-muscle fat-free mass or everything else, essentially.
And if you can now look at or try to compare, let's say, the best weightlifter versus the most obese person, what is I'm trying to find the range.
I understand. Yeah, I understand what your question. So, it's interesting. It's all, like I said, absolute versus relative. These body fat percentages, or what we're talking about, are relative percents. So, a power lifter is going to have an absolute more muscle than you or I, but ironically, some of their body fat percentages are going to be a little higher because that's conducive to their sport, right? So, they have a lot of muscle, but they generally have a lot of fat tissue. Again, in powerlifting, it's all about leverages, power, right? Obesity is similar. What's unique about obesity, they have a lot of absolute muscle, but I study protein turnover, skeletal muscle protein turnover, and so they have a bunch, obese individuals will have the same relative percentage roughly, and obviously a higher percent body fat, but their protein pool is a little more resistant to be renewed. So, as we sit here, Gil, right now, if you want to look at your arm, right now our muscle is in a constant state of turnover, right? Breaking down, building up, breaking down, building up. So in roughly 3 months, we've completely renewed our complete skeletal muscle mass.
Oh, interesting.
Right? So the issue with obesity, why they got a big pool of muscle, they can't renew it as well, right? So that means these damaged proteins are staying around, which is leading to some of those metabolic issues that an obese individual has. So a lot of our job is to try to kickstart that muscle to help with the renewal, to make sure we're getting high quality proteins in there. So, the relative percentages are tough to conceptualize, of course. A power lifter, absolutely more mass. Honestly, an obese individual has usually, than their healthy weight counterparts, are going to have quite a big absolute muscle. But the problem is that renewal of their muscle. They're just resistant to renewal, and we're trying to figure out how do we renew that muscle? Because adipose tissue, I'm sure as some of your other guests have said, it can talk to your muscle and do some negative things to it. So, that's a big puzzle in itself. We could probably spend 2 hours talking about clinical physiology, of course.
No, that was insightful. And you mentioned DEXA scan.
Yeah.
And that's something that I love, and I think that, in my opinion, everyone in the world should do that.
Yeah.
So can you explain to our audience what is DEXA scan?
Yeah, I mean, it's X-ray, essentially, radiation, right? So the beauty of it is low dose radiation. I'm a scientist, so obviously before we do anything, we have to get ethical approval. So we're really thoughtful about the tools we're using, because at the bottom line, we got to make sure research participants are safe. So it's just, it's an X-ray, and we're able to scan it, and depend on how sophisticated you are with your modeling, you can do 3-compartment models, 4-compartment models. I collaborate with experts in body composition, so I know, just general ideas related to it. But if you talk to a body composition expert, they'd be able to deep dive into it, and they're always thinking about the equations utilized to develop these compartments, and trying to determine fat-free mass versus fat mass versus bone mineral density, all these different aspects.
Yeah. So just to add to what Nick said, basically DEXA can give you a lot of information. You can know what is a body fat percentage, what is your muscle percentage, bone mineral density, and also visceral fat.
Yep.
And all of that is an amazing information for everyone that really want to live better longer, because that's all of, like bone mineral density is so important for us, especially for postmenopausal women, because if you have too little of that, you will break your bone. The muscle mass is important to protect your bones for breaking down later, and also transfer you from place to place. The adipose tissue is important to have it low because of some of the reasons that Nick mentioned. So it's literally a very important test. You can find it in some places in $100, so it's not something very expensive. And a lot of information, and I highly recommend. By the way, I don't have any financial interest in any of the DEXA. I just think that it's a good solution. And Nick, I want to continue with to understand from you, what are the benefits of engaging in regular exercise on skeletal muscle?
Yep.
And do you think that there is also impact on cardiac muscle, or it's only on skeletal muscle?
No. Obviously, all tissues are going to adapt. We're an integrated system. So I sort of alluded to your muscles in a state of turnover earlier. It experiences great adaptive potential. And so exercise is a huge stimulus to tell your muscle to adapt to, according to whatever stimulus you place on it. So there is a concept of training specificity, which I'm sure you talked about. So generally, if you're a weightlifter and doing more hypertrophic sort of protocols, your muscle will grow bigger because of, we call that hypertrophic protein remodeling. So when you do about a resistance exercise, you get an acute increase in protein synthesis, or the muscle building response, particularly in the contractile pool. We call those myofibrillar proteins, the ones that's responsible for force generation. So we're going to remodel that pool, and then when you continue to weightlift on a regular basis, those acute increases in protein synthesis or muscle building will ultimately cultivate into bigger muscles. Where an endurance exercise bout, it will focus on the contractile proteins as well, but it's remodeling that pool to be more fatigue resistant. You'll see a little more stimulus for the mitochondria, which are the energy producing organelle in your muscle, to adapt. Mitochondria are really special organelle in themselves, so I won't dive deep into that because that could be another hour conversation. But sometimes we forget that weightlifting also can help with the oxidative capacity of your muscles. So lifting weights can help build new mitochondria, help their function, can help build new fat transporters, glucose transporters, build new capillaries, which is what you're talking about with regards to smooth muscle. So exercise has great potential. Same with cardiac muscle. It's adaptable, right? Your heart muscle will adapt. The left ventricle hypertrophy so your left ventricle will grow bigger, gives it a bigger filling chamber. That means you can push more blood out to help perfuse your skeletal muscles with blood and energy, nutrients. Just like, your smooth muscle is there to help to dilate, to make perfusion, or to bathe your muscle with the nutrients it needs. So again, we're an integrative system. Even that stress from exercise on those vessels is a stimulus for those vessels, the smooth muscle, to adapt as well. So, I'm a muscle physiologist. Sometimes we get accused of thinking very reductionist in nature. I'm always like, it's all about skeletal muscle. But thankfully, all my years of training, they said, Nick, you got to think more holistically, think more integratively, and that really came when I was over in the Netherlands with Luc van Loon. He really taught me to think more holistically, and but you got to be an expert in something. I just chose skeletal muscle.
No, that's a very good answer. And now that we understand the basic of muscle physiology, what happened to our muscle tissue during the aging process?
Yeah, this is, the problem with not the problem, I think it's just a natural consequence of life, right? As we get older, life happens, routines change, right? So what do? We become, not only do we not participate in regular exercise training programs, but one of the big thing that we experience is our larger increases in sedentary behavior, right? So we have longer periods of sitting, then we are not making an active movement, because life changed. We're retired sometimes in terms of the aging population. They're no longer, just getting regular periods of physical activity. So those acute periods of inactivity, what they do essentially is decrease the sensitivity of your skeletal muscle to stimuli. So we're less responsive to the food we're eating. We're less responsive to the exercise stimulus even, unless you're doing it regularly. So my point being is what we found, if you can move, you can hold on to it, It does appear about after we hit this period about 80, this is the human work, some of the rodent stuff can show other stuff, but about 80, we do start to see some of the molecular environment start to change a little bit. So there is a bit of a tipping point, but my mentor Luke Van Loon, he goes, his often philosophy is, speaking about, I view 60 is not old, right? 70 is not old.
Yeah.
Your muscle doesn't truly, I know there's some epigenetic work out there, but your muscle really doesn't know how old it is, right? If you can, the problem is that we teach it not to understand some of these fundamental stimuli. And, a 50-year-old, 60-year-old can respond. The issue sometimes is that our connective tissue, it doesn't like to remodel the same. So we get these acute insults on some of our connective tissues, and that's what's transferring the force out of our muscle to the bone for movement, right? So the question is why, there's ultimately, anecdotally, you see obviously an impact of age on performance, right? So you could say, but it's something else more than just, it is more than just skeletal muscle. Our skeletal muscle is quite resilient. It can maintain. So there's probably some secondary insults that are happening. I mean, this is, whether it's something with the mitochondria, whether it's something with the stem cells, whether it's something with certain aspects of the force transfer proteins in our skeletal muscle. There might be some dysregulation, but when we just view skeletal muscle as a whole, it's responsive. Just minimizes that sedentary behavior, and it's important to keep in mind, Gil, that sometimes you can still hit our physical activity guidelines, but still be quite sedentary in your behavior, right? So you need to make we call these exercise snacks. So if you find yourself sitting for prolonged periods of time, get up and move. Whether it's doing body weight exercises, you need to break up those sedentary periods, because even during those short periods, we're making our muscles less sensitive to these stimuli. So we need to break these up. Even I'm 42, so I'm a young man, Gil.
You are very young.
I know, I am. I tell, it's a problem. I teach a lot of 20-year-olds. They think I'm an old man. I'm not old, guys. I am a young man.
Yeah, you are.
But even at 42 years old, I'm actively thinking, as an academic, we sit at our desk for long periods of time.
Yeah.
I get up, make sure I'm breaking up that sedentary behavior. I also do targeted exercise to make sure I'm hitting my physical activity guidelines, but I still am really thoughtful about breaking up sedentary behavior. And again, as we age, if we can just make sure we move more, we'll remain resilient and we can remain active in family and community life. Exercise is really the key. I'm the chair of the exercises medicine on campus, and that's our goal, is to try to incorporate exercise into campus culture, right? Because it has these tremendous health benefits, not only for physical health, but mental health as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see it, as you said, you are more aware of the literature than me, but I see it in the literature that the impact of exercise starting to gain more and more acceptable, that basically the exercise and the timing of the exercise and what you are doing can help you a lot in the later years of your life and make them from miserable to enjoyable. So if you are it's like investing for the 401k in a way. If you will exercise when you are young, and exactly as you said, Nick, you finish your college, you go to the desk work, and you're sitting for 12 hours a day. If you'll do it all your life, it's not good. Try to start doing it. If you ask me when to start as early as possible and continue to exercise and do it as much as you can.
Yeah, that's the point. There's a big advocate. Strong is becoming the new healthy as well. So if we can focus on physical physical strength,
Yeah.
it can help us safeguard against these declines that we ultimately might experience with aging. So the idea here is, as Gil was alluding to, and we're advocates, start now. Make sure you're physically strong now, because ultimately life happens. Sometimes you do encounter a catabolic insult that might cause you to be inactive for a bit. But if we can safeguard now, it will help us protect us later. So, and that can be at any point along that life continuum, right? It's never, as you said, never too late to start.
So we now understand that exercising is important, but what is, if we look at its effect on metabolic health, bone density, and daily function, normal function as we age? What do you see?
So skeletal muscle, again, I'm a skeletal muscle physiologist, so I take a lot of muscle-centric approaches to my idea. So, when you think about, we always argue as a muscle physiologist, not argue, but highlight, rather.
As a scientist, we like to argue.
Yeah, I know, I always have to adjust my tone. That initial inkling is that, you got to adjust, not only argue, but you got to constantly adjust your ego too. So there's a little life tip as well. But, so skeletal muscle, a couple of cool things it has for whole body metabolic health is, due to the virtue of its mass, it's the largest site of postprandial glucose disposal. So, obviously, and then by virtue of its mass, it's a large site of fat oxidation. It's also one of the biggest contributors to basal metabolic rate, which for most of us is the biggest determinant of total daily energy expenditure. So if we can protect our muscle, we can protect against weight regain, and that's especially important when you're going, under periods of weight loss.
Yeah.
And again, that's another topic that we don't have time for. So metabolically, beyond just physical function, which you alluded to, so obviously skeletal muscle is the force generator of our bodies, right? So, not to get deep into it, but, we have contractile proteins that form a cross bridge that generates force. We transfer that force out to the bone, out to the tendon for movement. Muscle is crucial for power generation, physical movement, etc. But again, we sometimes can't forget that aspect of full whole body metabolic health as well, with those points I talked about.
Excellent. And now we understand hopefully pretty well the muscle work. And a lot of our audience are interested about a protein intake. Mm-hmm. And specifically, we know, again, in the last few years, we see more and more understanding that the majority of us are not consuming enough proteins. And especially when you are trying to build muscle, the muscle built from protein. So instead of breaking the protein from other place, if you provide to your body the right amount of muscle, it will it will use that and then allow you to build the protein. But then there are a lot of questions that are very practical questions. For example, what is the best time to consume protein post-exercise? Do you have any opinion about that?
I do. Yeah. So, we have. So protein nutrition is a hot topic. I've been a protein nutrition for a number of years. So I'm not sure how far your listeners have been. So you said something about in Western culture, we're big protein eaters, right? It's just the nature. I mean, if I would do a dietary recall and I have here I'm in Illinois in the Midwest, almost everybody's eating above the protein RDA, or the recommended dietary allowance, okay, Gil. And so I'm actually constantly trying to do the opposite, especially with weightlifters, is I'm trying to advocate or tell them that they're largely consuming too much protein in their diet, okay? Weightlifters are notorious for eating a lot, based on that notion that, my muscle's made of protein, the more protein I eat, the better, okay? So I just want to talk generally about some of the cool parts about weightlifting. So weightlifting is fundamentally anabolic, okay? And what I mean by that, so fundamentally anabolic means a growth state, essentially.
Building muscle.
Yeah, building muscle.
Yeah.
So when you undergo weightlifting, it enhances the nutrient sensitivity of your skeletal muscle, all right? So we're better able to use that protein that we just ate, all right? And not only does it do it for that first meal after that exercise bout, but that nutrient sensitivity is quite prolonged in nature. We have work from my PhD that showed that nutrient sensitivity can last up to a day, if not longer, right? So you're making better use of protein nutrition after acute bout of weightlifting, provided it's that sufficient volume. The other thing it does, it makes better use of the amino acids that are being broken down. We're able to kick those back up in the skeletal muscle better.
Yeah.
All right, so we're breaking down muscle, we're getting increased nitrogen retention is what we call that. So weightlifters enhance nutrient sensitivity, better nitrogen retention or amino acid recycling. Both of those things are telling us as physiologists that they're better at using the protein in the diet. But yet, what are they doing? They're eating more in far excess. So guess what they're doing when they do that? They are upregulating proteolytic pathways or protein breakdown pathways. And so, and they're also training their gut that there's plenty of substrate coming in. So guess what your gut starts to do? Your splanchnic tissues, it starts to steal more of those amino acids out of the diet. All right, so if you're a protein over consumer, you're basically creating an inefficient system. So now I have a weightlifter that is doing all this cool stuff to make them more sensitive to their food. They're offsetting that by eating too much protein, all right? So normally what I'm doing is we don't need to eat that much protein in the diet. You can come back here, eat more like a normal human, which I would argue is about 1.2 grams per kg per day, which would be roughly, for an 80 kilo individual, they probably would need only, after a weightlifting bout, about 20 grams of protein. The problem is with those, and we'll talk about this later, those isolated protein powders, you can pack in a bunch of protein. So I kind of lost sight of what I was talking about.
Yeah, the question was about the timing.
Oh, the timing, yeah.
And you said that what I heard from you, the timing is like even 24 hours after, it's okay.
Yeah,
right?
the timing. So timing is a big topic, right? So, a lot of this work is done in the weightlifting. I'm also very familiar with protein nutrition for endurance athletes, but most of it's aimed at weightlifters. So a weightlifter, for some reason, they also think that anabolic window of potential is very short.
Like 2 hours. I'm hearing a lot about 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. The reality is it's much longer in nature, as I alluded to. So normally, you can do your weightlifting bout. You don't need to consume a protein shake. You can go home and eat a nice, high quality food first, whole food protein meal. And that's going to be really anabolic. And we can talk later about food versus protein powders, because that's a whole topic in itself. So for a weightlifter, nutrient timing is less important. Now if you're a practitioner, especially if you're dealing with athletes, sometimes I wouldn't say, you tell some fibs, because an athlete sometimes, if you tell them, it's not that important, they just won't do it. So a lot of times, if you're a sports nutritionist, you'll advocate that timing is really important, because you want your athlete
to see them.
To consume it.
It's like the guinea pig in the lab. You want to be sure that they have done it.
Yeah. So that's more. Do they? In that case, it's more a comfort level for the practitioner. Now, for the everyday individual, no, they don't need to be carrying around these protein shakes. So they're slamming it immediately after the bout. No, if you can go home and eat food. Again, a lot of this is going to depend on your training, like your schedule. Some of us live a hectic life. Protein supplements are convenient, but there's nothing special. If anything, they're less special than food. The other aspect is some individuals will advocate for pre-workout nutrition. There's no benefit from eating protein before your weightlifting bout versus after. The only problem is if you eat it before, some people can suffer GI distress, so you're going to have that substrate sitting around in your belly. And so if you're doing heavy squats, as I used to lift weights heavily, I wouldn't want a lot of substrate in my belly, especially when I'm squatting, because you might want to make sure that trash can's nearby if you do that. So eating after is fine. So again, who are you dealing with? Protein nutrition exists on a continuum. So, if you're dealing with athletes, you might say, make sure you have that protein shake so you see them, but it's not really necessary. No, you can go home and eat. So I would argue that nutrient timing has been, I mean, a lot of this, is aggressive sports marketing campaigns, right? That has advocated for, you need this protein powder, it's superior. You don't need it. It's fine it's not going to hurt you, but it's not really helping you either as a weightlifter.
And again, for the window of time, you are saying that, let me ask you a theoretical question. I exercised and I consume protein powder. I exercised and then I went home and eat a meal only 6 hours after. That's still okay?
I mean, So what happens is, so when we perform a bout of weightlifting, you see this big increase in the muscle building response. Okay, so protein synthesis. When you eat, you get an additive response to that already elevated protein synthesis. So what I'm saying is nutrition and exercise are synergistic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they interact. So what happens is throughout recovery, you see that large rise in protein synthesis, and it slowly starts to wane during recovery. So my point being is at 6 hours, you're probably not getting the same push that you would at 3 hours, right? Because your exercise-induced increase in protein synthesis is starting to decay, exactly, or wane. So my point is, you don't need to eat within 30, 60 minutes, but you probably, to maximize the anabolic potential of that bout, within 0 to 3 hours, I guess is the most overriding.
Okay, so we have a window of 3 hours, and in that window,
I don't like that word window, but you can say
window,
that.
Okay, let's say the best timing is 0 to 3 hours, because.
But you would still win at 6 hours, but you're probably losing
but it's
some.
But the best is in this not window, but
you
timing.
can say window. I'm sorry, but it sort of emphasizes this.
You don't lose it if you do it at 3 hours and 15 minutes, but at that time span, you will have the best response of the protein that you consume. Now you started to talk, and we wanted to discuss it later, but I want to discuss it now about basically protein powder versus a real meal. So can you discuss about that and what is?
Sure. Okay, I'm going to have to put a caveat out there. I'm a big food first approach. So food first advocates for the use of whole foods within a performance nutrition menu, but food first doesn't mean food only. And what I mean by that, depending on, again, your schedule, protein supplements can be useful, all right? But my point is they shouldn't be advocated as superior, and I'm going to tell you why, okay? I've spent a lot of time studying protein within its natural food matrix, right? So food is more than just protein, especially protein foods, I guess is what I'm alluding to. It consists of other nutrients, right? You can manipulate different, we call that a food matrix. So the food matrix is essentially how the chemical dynamics of the food, so its structure, the nutrients inside it. So we can manipulate the food matrix by mincing up a food source, right? And so we can improve digestibility, but like that, and thus protein quality. But what we're finding out is that why the amino acids are the primary drivers of your remodeling response, these amino acids can get help from the food matrix. So we call these food matrix effects, all right? So the food matrix can also modulate how these amino acids are being delivered into circulation. An isolated protein supplement, it's just that. It's kind of boring. There's nothing in it to help it. It's convenient. It tastes good sometimes because they put flavor in them, but it's nothing exciting. It is what it is. It's protein, right? And the problem with eating an isolated protein powder, because there's nothing else in it, it's isolated, we always look at the appearance rates of amino acids, right? So what you want to do is you eat food, it gets digested and absorbed, and then you see these amino acids showing up in the circulation, right? Now, one of the most popular protein powders is whey protein, right? We're all familiar with that.
Of course.
A lot of people call it a fast digesting protein, right? And what they mean by that is when you eat it, these amino acids from that food source are showing up pretty darn quick. So within 60 minutes, they're peaking, 60 to 90 minutes. Now, when you eat a whole food source of protein, it doesn't peak till 2 hours later, right? So whey, they're thinking, oh, it's great. It gets into circulation, providing a lot of signals to your muscle to help it recover.
Yeah.
But guess what else it's doing? So whenever you see a large increase in amino acids, especially rapidly, those large amount of amino acids in a short amount of time are a strong signal for oxidation or waste. Well, yeah, some of them are going to your muscle. You're wasting a lot of that because you're just getting them in too quick, right? Now, as an athlete, if you are doing repeated bouts of exercise, you sort of want that. You don't want stuff sitting around your belly, right? But most of us are not doing multiple training bouts throughout the day where, that fast digesting protein would be that useful. So food is great because it can help with diet quality, because it's delivering more than just protein. It can modulate how those amino acids are being delivered. It can make better use of the substrate, so you don't need as much, right? Isolated isolated protein powders, they have no help, nothing. It's just that. It's very boring. It's not exciting beyond the chocolate flavor that they throw in to help with taste. So food is good for diet quality, making better use of the food protein, and arguably, we're showing it's even more anabolic at the same relative dose, right? Yeah. So, you can't go wrong with a whole food matrix.
Food is superior.
100%.
Yeah. Then you have.
But there's nothing wrong with protein powders.
No, I understand. Yeah. Now I want to ask about the distribution during the day. So you said that you exercise. Let's assume that we are now at 9 a.m. You went to an exercise session of an hour. You lift a lot of weight. And you can consume, let's go with the whey protein just as an example, okay? Sure. So you can consume 20 gram or 40 gram of whey protein at a time, which sounds like, from what I heard from you, a lot of it will go for waste. Yeah. Or you can divide it and come and say, okay, my strategy is I'll consume 10 gram now and 10 gram in 2 hours. And what is better?
Okay, so again, I'm an advocate of thinking. So my thinking, Gil, I don't use these bottom-up approaches. I think from a top-down, all right? So you're asking a very dynamic question. Again, going back to your personalized nutrition initiative, our diets are very personalized, right? So first off, I'd have to think about what is the dietary pattern, meaning am I dealing with a vegetarian eating pattern? Am I dealing with somebody who's eating a lot of high-quality food proteins, so a lot of animal-based food proteins, okay? I would hypothesize, and we're running studies right now to confirm this hypothesis. So, for example, I would hypothesize that timing, or distribution rather, is less relevant for someone who's eating an animal-based diet, or it's a U.S. healthy eating pattern essentially. So people who's regularly incorporating animal-based food proteins. Why? Because animal-based food proteins or higher quality, right? Their amino acid composition basically is good at delivering target amounts of amino acids to help our body tissues. The issue is sometimes somebody who's eating vegan. Now I would argue, okay, so it's hard to pin down this until we get some of our data out that, if I talk to somebody who's on a vegan eating pattern, the data we have is not very fair right now because a lot of this is viewed based on isolated plant foods, right? But most vegans, if not all vegans, they're not eating a single plant food, right? They're using complementary protein pairings. So they're taking, beans and rice is the most classic one. So they're taking two food groups, mixing it together to help that amino acid composition to make it more like an animal-based food. Mm-hmm. I would hypothesize that if you're eating a vegan diet, I think distribution is probably more important than somebody who's eating a US style eating pattern. So a lot of the data shows that if you're eating animal-based food, distribution seems you can wash it out a little bit, the importance of it, just so you're achieving a target amount in the day, but I don't think that's true with a vegan-based diet. Okay. I think distribution, I think getting a steady intake of these amino acids are going to be more important to somebody who's not eating
meat or
meat in
dairy
particular.
And egg,
those are just high-quality foods.
Yeah. Let me. Sorry that I'm pushing on that point because I think that this point is very confusing for our viewer.
Yeah.
So let's assume that I eat meat once a day, okay,
Yeah.
and I eat chicken, and I exercise in the morning.
Sure.
Where is the better time for me to consume the chicken, at lunch or at dinner?
No, I mean, so one of the, yeah, so you're talking about somebody's only eating one mealtime a day, Gil?
No, I eat a meal,
Okay.
but I eat only a protein, like animal-based protein once a day. The other part, let's say, I will decide whether at lunch I will eat the chicken or at dinner I will eat rice and beans.
I would eat it during recovery from exercise, Gil. I mean, ideally, you're going to be incorporating it. Really, breakfast is one. We really advocate for positioning protein foods at breakfast because that tends to be a low protein time for a lot of them, for a lot of people. And I sort of alluded to, not to tell your listeners what you have for breakfast. I said a granola bar, right? I really should have had a more protein fortified breakfast because. That's going to help with satiety through the day. It's going to help with glucose control. But, if we're thinking purely from an exercise perspective, you exercise, I would really want some high quality food protein during that recovery window, and I use the word window, but that's fine. Within that, as I alluded to, within that 0 to 3.
Okay, so now I understand. So what you are saying, if you eat animal-based protein only once a day, the best time to consume it is post-exercise.
I would argue that's true. I think that's true. I don't have data to support that. But if I was navigating that world where I was only eating, animal-based foods once a day, I would say that's a good time to eat it. I would really try to find a way to eat it at breakfast as well, as I alluded to. But I think the biggest point, the best take-home point, a lot of the current practitioners are advocating or suggesting that distribution is less relevant provided you're eating enough absolute protein. But keep in mind, what they're recommending is 1.6 grams per kg per day, if not upwards to 2.2 grams per kg per day of food protein. Our RDA for food protein is 0.8 grams per day. So they're advocating that you need roughly double the amount of food protein in our diets to help support the resistance exercise adaptive response. I'm not completely on board with that. I think if you don't need to shoot for those high levels, provided you're more clever with how you eat, okay? I would argue that we can get closer to the protein RDA, quit trying to shove all of this food protein on the people's plates, provided we actually educate and tell them the importance of some of this stuff, right? It's, of course, easier messaging for your listeners if I just say, yeah, eat a lot, nothing else matters, right? That's a very generic, easy to translate.
No, we like a complex solution. No, we like it. We like to find it. So
my point is, if you're eating, you can either eat a lot and you can offset any issue with protein quality, any issue with distribution. But if you're like me, protein is expensive and you want to be a little more clever with your food protein, eat closer to the protein RDA. I would say you probably need a little more than the 0.8, closer to 1.2. Then you probably got to be a little more thoughtful about distribution. You certainly got to be more thoughtful about protein quality. But if you're just eating a lot, don't worry about it.
Yeah. So if I'm trying to summarize, and correct me if I'm wrong, what I learned from you is first, animal-based protein is superior on the isolated.
Can I put a caveat in there? Animal-based protein is higher quality. Okay, that's when a lot of these protein quality scores are viewed. I eat chicken. I eat beef. I eat whatever. But nobody eats like that, right? And yes, when you compare single foods to animal. So if you compare a single plant-based food to an animal-based food, animal-based foods are higher quality, of course. But what do? We eat them as part of a whole food matrix, rather. So you're able to improve the quality of a plant-based meal by using, like I said, complementary protein pairings. And I use the example beans and rice is the most classic one. But that's not how our protein quality markers are currently developed. They're developed very reductionist in nature. Like, I have beef, what's the score? I have soy protein, what's the score? And yes, when you do that, animal-based is superior, no doubt.
So the second point that I learned from you that is interesting is that basically the window that our muscle build itself is like around 24 hours, but it's get to a peak between 0 to 3 hours. So if you want to find the best timing, I would say 0 to 3 hours, but even if you do it at 3 hours, 30 minutes, it's not the end of the world. So don't get a panic about that.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So your window of anabolic potential after weightlifting is very prolonged. Endurance exercise is another story.
Okay, so we'll touch it in a second because I want to summarize this point.
Sure.
And then another very good point that not a lot of people are thinking about it, distribute your protein consumption during the day. And we have usually our breakfast, at least in the US, is very low in protein. So if you can, try to distribute some of your protein consumption to the breakfast.
So that's really the focus. We need to make sure that we're eating a protein-rich breakfast. And that would, like I said, help manage energy intake throughout the day as well. And also it's been shown to have better control of, postprandial glucose.
Okay, so Nick, now you mentioned weightlifting different than endurance exercise.
Sure.
So please elaborate on that.
Yeah, like I said, these are usually multiple conversations. So weightlifters, I said, weightlifting is fundamentally anabolic. It makes our muscles more sensitive to the food we eat. We don't experience that same scenario after, I'll use a running bout, a cycling bout, etc. So exercise is catabolic. Just during the recovery period, we become anabolic, but exercise in itself is catabolic, meaning we're using energy, we're breaking down substrates. Okay, so a lot of times as an exercise physiologist, we view protein as quite trivial as a substrate to allow us to exercise, right? Normally we're thinking fat, carbohydrate. And protein, we always say we have a protein requirement. Really, we have an amino acid requirement, right? So if we zoom in on certain amino acids related to exercise metabolism, related to running, some of them become more interesting. One in particular is leucine. Okay, so what we do is we'll break down leucine during exercise. We'll steal its carbons to help us make acetyl-CoA, which we utilize for metabolism to help us make ATP. I don't need to get into biochemistry here. So what we see is leucine oxidation goes up. So not protein oxidation as a whole is quite trivial, but certain amino acids do get oxidized. So leucine is sort of a special amino acid. It's primarily oxidized in your skeletal muscle as opposed to getting extracted by your splanchnic tissues. So we see leucine oxidation go up, all right? So you're running, you're oxidizing leucine, and then you stop running. You're usually going to have some carbohydrate to help replenish your muscle glycogen. You should also have some protein, of course, to help your muscles remodel, which is what a weightlifter is constantly thinking. But what a runner sometimes isn't recognizing is they also need to be worried about all that leucine oxidation, right? So not only so a runner's fighting two battles. They got to replace those amino acids that were lost during exercise, but also provide enough substrate to allow their muscles to recover. So endurance exercise places more stress on your protein nutrition. So normally, I'm trying to advocate for a runner to incorporate more protein into their post-exercise eating regimen to make sure they're fully recovered. And we have data that support that, Gil. So essentially, but the problem with the runner is if you put too much protein in that post-exercise meal, it's going to offset the other nutrients, right? And carbohydrates are real important. So normally, this is where I sort of said I'm an advocate for food first, but not food only. So sometimes a runner can benefit from using an isolated food protein. So, they can mix that with some carbohydrates, take an isolated protein supplement.
Is it better to consume branched-chain amino acids specifically, or a full protein is okay?
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm a huge I'm not an advocate of using branched chain amino acid supplements. My point is always why eat 3 when you can eat them all, right? and certainly food's going to provide them all. To build a functional protein, you need all the amino acids. So anyway, you can use a whey protein, a plant-based protein powder, whatever the preference of the runner is. So that's where you'd want to incorporate a plant-based supplement, most likely to help replace those oxidative losses, and then 2 hours later, eat a whole food meal. So more frequent eating, because if you just try to eat a big bolus of food protein, my fear is that you're going to not be able to swallow it all, and you're going to be offsetting some of the other benefits of eating carbohydrates, for example, for glycogen resynthesis.
So let me try to understand it.
Translate.
So I went for a run for an hour. I finished the run. Okay. What should I do immediately post-run?
I would consume about 20 grams of protein and about 50 grams of carbohydrate.
Immediately post-run?
I would, yes, definitely within that hour. So that window of potential is much more shorter.
Okay.
That's largely because of the glycogen resynthesis. You still benefit from food protein, but muscle glycogen, which is our major fuel, we got to protect that if you're an endurance runner. So usually we advocate for endurance runners to make sure they're eating enough carbohydrate, and that's where I'd say make sure you also incorporate some protein. It might make the most sense to use an isolated protein source to make sure it's easily, gets into circulation quick. Then you can go home, eat your nice, proper, high quality, food first menu approach, right? So where you eat, a good source of food protein as well as, a good source of carbohydrates. Yeah.
So again, there is a difference which is interesting between endurance and strength. In strength, you have the window of 3 hours or even more.
Yeah.
Here, you need as soon as you can to consume some protein and carbohydrate, and then you can get back to your routine.
Yeah, that's right. That's correct. Yeah. So, and again, runners are always so focused on the carbohydrate, and they should, but they're not thinking a lot of times about how important the protein is to replace those amino acid that were lost during the exercise bout, as well as making sure you have enough substrate to help your muscles recover.
Yeah. So a follow-up question. That was great. I think that there is a lot of confusion, and you read the Men Health magazine, Women Health magazine, and they are giving you stories that are usually not true. So it's great to hear it from an expert like yourself. My next question is about, is there a difference in protein or amino acid needs based on age, gender, ethnicity?
Okay, yeah, I mean, again, that's using these top-down approaches. A lot of times you got to be thoughtful about culture. What's the eating patterns, right? What's the habitual eating pattern? I just sort of argued if you're eating a lot of vegan-based approaches, you might have to be more thoughtful with your food protein. If you have access to a lot of high quality animal-based foods, you can probably be less thoughtful with it, right? So that is going to be dependent, again, the personalized approach. As a scientist, we sort of throw out these overarching generalized recommendations, but really you got to look at everything. What's the exercise pattern? What type of what type of pattern is it? These kind of things. That's going to dictate your need. Age is an interesting one. When I was over in the Netherlands, I focused a lot on aging and this concept of anabolic resistance. And what I mean by that is what we were noticing was that as we age, you become more resistant to the food you're eating. Okay, so what they were trying to do, or what we were trying to do, was sort of just feed more to overcome that anabolic resistance. All right, so if a young person needs 15 to 20 grams of food protein to maximize the response, we'd feed an old person 30 grams to try to elicit a bigger response. Okay, the beauty of exercise is, as I alluded to, if we exercise and then eat food, we can sort of bring that protein load lower, okay? Because now we're using exercise as a way to enhance the nutrient sensitivity, especially resistance exercise in particular. So the other issue is what we see is with an older person. This is older men I'm talking about now. I can talk about postmenopausal women coming up next, because this is another whole scenario.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, so older men, what we've noticed is that to really, from the weightlifting bout, to really induce a lot of nutrient sensitivity, they need a little more volume than their younger counterparts. So they need more repetitions. So example would be, if a young person needs 3 sets of 10 repetitions of a particular exercise to enhance their amino acid sensitivity of their muscles, an older person, what we see, needs closer to almost double the volume, so 6 sets, right? And so if you do enough volume on an aging muscle, we can enhance that sensitivity, and the protein recommendations become a little more youth-like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nick, can you define what is old in your?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so usually 65 years or older. Yeah,
So basically,
closer to 70.
People above 60 or males above 65. When you exercise and you see, or your trainer telling you to do 2 repeats, maybe you need to do 4 to receive the same value.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm just talking about, so we're talking about leg extension, right? And I recognize people are busy. You need to find time-efficient strategies. A lot of, so we're not trying to advocate for doing, spending more time in the gym. You can still be effective. You just might need a little more as we get a little older, just to ensure that we completely enhance the nutrient sensitivity of that, amino acid sensitivity of that skeletal muscle. So that was for older men. Post-menopausal women, we're just learning a lot. Unfortunately, as scientists, we recognize this, that we were studying men too much, right? And so now we're trying to better define the exercise needs, the protein needs of older females. I have some recent data that's showing, and a colleague down in Mizzou has some that supports it as well, that I sort of said, Gil, as we're sitting here, basal turnover, we're in a constant state of turnover, right? So we're constantly breaking down, building up, breaking down, building up. Postmenopausal women, their resting protein synthesis rate is higher than in older men, all right? It's probably related to hormonal, the estrogen, right? Yeah. So guess what? So an older female has a higher baseline rate. So what we're seeing with that, because of this high resting turnover, there's less chance for them to make a big increase in response to food and exercise, all right? So we need to figure out, and I don't have the answer yet, we're working on it, how can we enhance the sensitivity of these aging females, right? How can we sort of make sure that, yes, we're working against this higher background or this higher baseline rate of protein turnover, but I don't have the answer. I think it's some type of nutritional manipulation, some type of exercise manipulation over, one of my colleagues over in overseas, they're using estrogen replacement therapy to sort of mellow that out. I'm not saying advocating for everybody get on some type of pharmaceutical manipulation, but we got to figure that out. So there are differences. There's no difference between a young man and a young female, but there is difference with age, and I don't have all the answers yet for the postmenopausal.
So if I understood you correctly, what you are saying that for postmenopausal women, it's harder for them to build muscle, correct?
That's what they're not responding. Yeah, it's harder for them. I don't know if harder is the right word, but they have this higher background, so they're not. It's harder, I guess. Yeah, they're not responding to the same extent. Yeah.
So if you, I'm trying to take the analogy that you gave, like a young male need to do, let's say, 2 repetitions. Older men, let's say 65 to 70, need to do 4 repetitions. Yeah. What do you think about postmenopausal women in that?
Good question. I don't have the. Normally, when we see this high baseline rate, and we see the same in dialysis patients, we got to figure out a way to bring that baseline rate down to help them respond. Okay, we're working on it. It's something, ask me in 5-10 years. Hopefully we can figure this out. It's an important question. I have some ideas we're writing grants on, but I don't have the answer right now at this time, Gil. I should allude to, I know you used the 2-4 repetitions to keep it simple, but but generally your muscle is going to respond better to a little higher volume than 2 to 4 repetitions.
Let's say 3 and 6. now a follow-up question about postmenopausal women, because I think that's very important. And I think that I see it in the gym. I don't know if you see it as well, and I spoke with some people. Somehow let's say older women are getting less to the gym and lifting weight than let's say younger women, so older males and younger males. And I think that it's more in the they feel like, at least my generation of women that are close in the menopausal transition, they feel like building muscle is for males and not for females.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a social scientist. I think hopefully that's changing. We advocate that a lot. You know, it's a constant. I mean, this could be for all you know, males and females. Like when you're especially undergoing a program of weightlifting, the scale can be scary. Really, this is where your DEXA point comes in. You got to think about the composition of that absolute mass.
Not the weight, it's the composition.
So this, you know, if you're undergoing a program of weightlifting, the scale's not your friend, because it can. I'm not changing. You know, my weight's not changing.
But you're building muscle.
Yeah, your composition's changing, right? You're getting more muscle, less fat. So phenotypically, there are changes. So that's where, arguably the body composition is much more important.
But again, follow-up question again about the postmenopausal, because it's very important.
Yeah.
So could it be better for a woman, let's say a 40 years old woman, okay, she knows that she will come to the menopause, I don't know, in the next 10 years or so, maybe 12 years. Is it a good strategy for her to come and say, later on it will be very hard for me to build muscle, so now I need to work hard to build as much muscle as I can in order to maintain it later? Is it a good strategy?
I mean, arguably that's a good strategy for all of us, Gil. I mean, I'm not going to say we all, as I alluded to, it's real important that we build strength now to help safeguard against these ultimate declines that we're going to experience. So whether you're a male, female, whether you're 20 years old, it doesn't matter. It's our time now, right? You need to build strength. And I think your point is it could be particularly important for an older woman.
That's what I'm trying to say. For male, so I need to spend, instead of an hour in the gym, 2 hours in the gym, and I can still build muscle. For female, it will be harder. That's what I'm saying in the older age.
Yeah, but I mean, I can't put an absolute on it. Based on these acute data, there's some evidence to suggest that's true, Gil. Whether that plays out in the long term, that's where the longitudinal designs have to be done. And those are showing up now. The NIH, the National Institute of Health, have started to invest a little more heavily in understanding not only the aging impacts of exercise, but also any gender-based differences as well. So, so in the future, we'll have a lot more information than I can currently say now. I'm doing a lot of speculation, which I love to do, but I could be wrong.
No, absolutely, but that's okay. It's a podcast. It's not a peer-reviewed scientific publication. So, Nick, it sounds like we are close to time. And I have like 50,000 more questions that I would like to ask you, but unfortunately you need to go back to your subject and collect muscle, which again I would love to see, but I'm not sure that I have time for. So usually at the last question at Longevity by Design is about if you can give a tip of one recommendation for our audience. What is the best, if they can do only one intervention, what is the best intervention that they should do in order to live better longer?
Well, I mean, Gil, we know you are what you eat and how you move, right? So, move more. That's the only tip. It doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter if it's weightlifting, whatever. The biggest thing about moving is consistency. So do something you enjoy, do something that makes you smile, and be consistent with it. That's the most important part, right? It does, at the end of the day, move more however you want. Yeah, that's the biggest tip I can give, the most overriding tip.
Excellent. So it was a pleasure spending an hour plus with you, and it was a pleasure spending time here at the University of Illinois. I really enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Gil. Appreciate it.